I, for one, am tired of Spider-Man cartoons because they do this all the time. Every 2 years, I think, if I'm not mistaken, roughly 2 to 3 years. And they usually last from 1 to 3 seasons, depending on. They usually have an interesting voice cast, sometimes celebrities, sometimes not. Sometimes they get it right. Sometimes they go more kiddie. Sometimes they do like hit right in the teen spot. So another Spider-Man cartoon to me is always annoying. And overall, I thought they did a pretty good job.
Some motherfuckers are always trying to ice skate uphill.
Welcome, everybody, to Blerdlines. This is your man, Cam. With me, as always, is...
the Lone Wolf in Cub, a.k.a. the Black Stringy de Panta.
As well as...
your friendly neighborhood, Josh.
And as always...
the Professor, Lord of Light himself. Remember that the night is dark and full of terrors.
Wow.
So Anatar.
Wow.
That's one of my names, not today.
Wow.
That's so dark for our actual subject.
It really is.
To segue, we are back talking about Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, dropped on Disney Plus, wrapped up a couple, maybe like a week, 2 weeks ago, something like that. But there's a bunch of stuff that's out that's actually worth watching right now and good. And so, we're going to fit things in when we can, but we wanted to hop on and talk about it. I've seen the whole thing. D'Angelo's seen the whole thing. Josh has seen a couple episodes. Cam's seen clips. So that gives you the reference of where we're all at. The one thing I will say, a couple things to do it is I, for one, am tired of Spider-Man cartoons because they do this all the time. Every 2 years, I think, if I'm not mistaken, roughly 2 to 3 years. And they usually last from 1 to 3 seasons, depending on. They usually have an interesting voice cast, sometimes celebrities, sometimes not. Sometimes they get it right. Sometimes they go more kiddie. Sometimes they do like hit right in the teen spot. So another Spider-Man cartoon to me is always annoying because I'm just like, okay, Marvel has over 2,500 licensed characters that they can make a cartoon of anything. But they still keep doing this every 2 to 3 years. And they know why. It makes money. They can sell toys and all that. But for me, I was not actually going to watch it. Super Bowl time. After the Super Bowl, we ended up me and Josh watched the first, I think, 1 or 2 episodes. And I was kind of like, oh, okay, the way they're doing this narrative is kind of interesting. So I ended up finishing up watching it. And overall, I thought they did a pretty good job. I was actually pleasantly surprised. It was pretty tight. Was it 8 episodes, something like that?
8 episodes.
Yeah, something like 8 episodes. Good voice casting, great designs. The designs was by a designer named Leo Romero, who has did a bunch of Marvel books, but also Birds of Prey for DC, the comic books, by the way. But his style of design is is almost a throwback to the 60s era. And so he has a very like heavy lines, more minimalistic. And so it has like almost a Kirby-esque type of feel. And so I thought like character design wise was really cool. Animation, it took me about 3 episodes to really actually like get into it. I felt it was a little too stiff. Like the 3D with toon shading is not for everyone. And I think you have to either buy into it or just check out.
So here's my thing real quick. When I seen the clips, I felt like I was watching the Watchmen read along live, or not live action, but the read along comic, where it's one voiceover for all the characters, but the art design looks similar. And I was like, I don't know about this, but you guys spoke highly of it, so I'm going to give it a shot.
Well, 2 out of the 3 of us that have seen it spoke highly of it. The animation, like what Cam just alluded to, either you're into it or you're not. And for me, if you're doing animation, the visuals matter. And like, what's a show that took me out? The Green Lantern animated series. Couldn't stand the animation. It bothered me so much. And I'm an animation, like I love to my core animation. Like there are things that you can do in animation that you can't do in live action with, very little in the way of budget implications. But I can't stand watching it. Like it drives me insane looking at it. I will try to give it another go just because 2 people that I highly respect when it comes to to story and writing, and just the way a narrative can move, both say it was pretty good. Like, it wasn't just okay, it was pretty good. Especially coming from D'Angelo, that's a massively huge endorsement. But the animation just, oh God, it's painful. I hate it. I hate it so much.
Yeah, I understand that. For me, I found this. It wasn't something I even knew about. I think I heard about it, but I didn't really know what excuse me, what it was. I need some water.
Yeah, and it was one of those things where like it wasn't really on my radar per se, but then when I saw the character designer, that's what actually got me into it. And then the one of the things that was also kind of a good thing is it's, you know, kind of like an Elseworld, DC Elseworld thing. So it's not main continuity, but it has all the same similar things. And you pick up on it really quick because Norman Osborn is Black, and so is Harry, and it works pretty well actually. Like, it just makes sense. They also did a couple smaller tweaks like that too. Tombstone is Parker's age, and he's like a football player, and he's well liked and all that. And like, they actually give Tombstone a backstory that actually makes sense and actually sees his progression of why he would become this character. So that actually kind of was, at first I was kind of like, where's this going? And the way they made it work was actually kind of cool.
Can I add a quick? You said Norman Osborn is Black, and so is his son. And I'm like, well, if his son wasn't Black, we'd have some other questions.
Yeah. Facts.
You're not fully Black. No, I'm just and I'm back. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Cam. You were making a point about.
Yeah, they just did a little tweaks about certain types of characters, and they brought in things that they basically established in the world easily that, hey, this is a world that has superheroes. Things like the Sokovia Accords happen. This kid, Sokovia, this kid is in that world, and in the beginning, you see Doc Strange fighting something, and it starts the whole chain of events. But it firmly, and one thing that I did like about it is it's like, hey, here is this character already in this established world by giving us a little nuggets, and it's not like a beginning origin story type of thing that we've all known and we're bored of. And so they did a nice twist on it that made it really, really cool. And I thought that was better than it was. It was pleasant. It was a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, and it was just a fun thing for me. I found it surfing through Disney Plus, which I rarely open that app at all. And I enjoyed it. I just started watching it. The animation didn't bother me, but I'm also not as well versed in the nuances of animation as you guys are, because I think it's a fair assessment, but it didn't bother me. Narrative wise, I thought they told a really simple story that worked as an alternate to the main Prime Peter in the MCU. That was the thing that stood out to me, as Cam just mentioned, the mentioning of the Sokovia Accords and positioning this as what if Peter never met Tony Stark and didn't participate with the Civil War. And it really does it has a great path for storytelling in that it can keep reminding you of the Prime stuff, but also live on its own, because Norman Osborn, as far as we know, doesn't exist in the Prime universe. Well, no, he doesn't. And actually, the Norman Osborn from the other universe confirmed it. He said he went to his house, there was nobody there, he didn't exist. And so this was a good way to have some of the Spidey storylines that we are familiar with, but also involve the character that is Tom Holland, understood to be Tom Holland's version, even though he's not the voice actor here. Hudson Thames is, and he also voiced Spider-Man, that version of Peter Parker, in the What If show, if I'm not, from what I'm reading here. And they do a good job with the origin story. I was surprised at because we never see how Peter's bitten in the MCU version. We don't know how that happened. And he's not very detailed with the specifics. They don't tell us specifically what happened. Here we see a very specific how he specifically gets the spider on him, how it bites him, with the chain, the transformation, all that stuff. And it's done in a very unique way. I wasn't expecting it to be that. And then when they wrap back around and show why they did it that way, surprisingly, I wasn't annoyed because it involved time travel. But not the type of time travel that is grandfather paradox and if this happened, but more of just a paradox in and of itself. You know, this thing is the cause of that thing, cause and effect, causality. And I think that is a little bit better than talking about if you move a pin in this direction, you know, the Yellowstone volcano will erupt in 2028. You know, it's that don't pass the smell test, but this was good because it doesn't focus on the act of time travel itself as much as moving things from one space in time to another and having that impact when you catch up to that moment in time. You now understand how it all happened, but nothing's changing.
Yeah, and that was a good part because we have a well-loved hatred of time travel, especially if it deals with anything X related. But
I don't.
I do. But in this, they did a really good job with it. Also, too, the use of, they didn't have an MJ in there. They had they swapped out MJ for a Nico Minori, who's from Runaways. And then they have his original love interest before MJ and Gwen. I always forget that character's name. But yeah, it was good. And it was interesting because they did a nice deep dive of, Norman plays the mentor in this situation. So Norman's already rich. He's already like, hey kid, let's figure out a better costume for you. And so what they do is they go through and they use the old costumes from comics, right? The Shroud and Ricochet and those other like mini Spider-Man costumes that like had 2 seconds and each one has a flaw in it or something like that. But it was actually pretty cool. And I enjoyed that they started to introduce the Sinister Six in a way that makes sense in the whole scheme of things in the background, right? Much. So yeah. Scorpion's a gangster and he has a whole team. Otto is a rival of Norman. He kind of hates him, so he starts to do.
He's an arms dealer.
Yeah, he's an arms dealer.
But think about that. He's an arms dealer.
But also too, Janzo can elaborate, but the showrunner Jeff Trammell is a black guy from Detroit. He wrote and voice acted on Craig and the Creek. And he's the showrunner from this. And he actually he was in the running to pitch for X-Men 97. And Feige actually wanted him to do Spider-Man himself because he liked his Spider-Man pitch a little bit better than his X-Men one. And so I thought that was actually a cool, like, little nugget. And he's done tons of cartoons beforehand. I think the way he treated the show in general, it had a good feel to it. And even the parts of nuance, and we were talking about this before about how, the character that becomes Tombstone, he's a black kid, he has cornrows, he's the football player. And in certain circumstances, you see him as like he's a really nice kid. He well-liked on the football team. And everyone assumes that a thing about him. And then when you see his actual life, he lives in the hood. He has to protect his younger brother from gang members. He has to do all these things. And they do it in a way that's not over heavy-handed. They don't do a thing that smacks you in the face, but it makes sense in a way that goes into the narrative without having to be like, hey, kids, stay away from drugs type of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's what impressed me as the story went on. You see these great nuances that separate this Peter Parker and Spider-Man story from the Tom Holland, again, MCU Prime version. Like, for example, Tony is more of because of his own experience in Iron Man, the first one, when he was pre-Iron Man, dealing with weapons and knowing how destructive his power in the world was even before he became Iron Man. It made his journey as Iron Man more about being responsible and keeping those things out of the wrong hands versus Norman, who is still very much underneath a mad scientist. he's very much telling Peter, no, you with great power comes great respect. Like, he doesn't say responsibility. And when at that moment I was like, okay, now we working with something different. They're slowly showing you the inevitability of that clash without marching toward it really super fast. We all know who Norman Osborn becomes, and most people, even in the sort of pedestrian sense of knowledge of Spider-Man, kind of knows that relationship, even if you just saw the Raimi film. So Norman's actions and his mentorship of Peter, you can see why it's not going to work out because Peter, and that's the juxtapositioning of Peter being mentored by Norman versus Peter being mentored by Tony Stark, Iron Man. And I love that it isn't just a parallel. It's literally, you have foils of one another. Tony Stark is also a scientist. He's a billionaire. He has an alter ego, but the world knows about his alter ego, and his alter ego is him. It's not something that takes over him and gets him to do these horrible things. Whereas Norman has to hide his from the world, because if they knew that the Green Goblin and Norman Osborn were one the same, he'd go to jail, he'd be persecuted. So I love those dichotomies playing out without it actually have to be active in the narrative. But if you're familiar with the prime timeline of where this story is coming from, you can appreciate the nuances that the alternate is giving us.
Yeah, and they do a good job of the big bad, and how they use the Sinister Six throughout the show is really good. So you'll get a little touches of Rhino, you get a little touches of Otto, you'll have a little touches of Scorpion and Tombstone's up in there too. So it is kind of an interesting thing, and you have a nice mix of there's the symbiote comes in, and the way the symbiote gets there makes sense. And it's the symbiote first, and it's not Venom. And I think that's one thing that they did a really good job of separating those two things out.
Wait, how many episodes for the
season?
8.
Yeah.
It's 8 of solid storytelling, so they have an active plot line, but then there's a lot of world building going on.
Yeah.
So much like the way Matt Reeves does with the Batman, where yes, the Riddler is the main antagonist and Falcone is the overarching antagonist, but Penguin is there, and all these other they make the villains characters so that when they become villains, it matters a little bit more. And we saw in the Penguin show, as we, not to get too far off, that you can continue that track. You can kind of make them relatable, but still make them commit an act that is a moral event horizon, which perfectly positions them as irredeemable and as a villain, because they make a choice that you wouldn't have made because it's the wrong choice. And that's what, and then so in Spider-Man, you have a lot of that happening where the characters where these villains have been made characters. When we meet Otto Octavius, it's not him, breaking into a bank and stealing money and Spider-Man has to catch him. No, we find out after a little bit going into the story that he's the one doing this behind this action. And he has history with Norman Osborn. We also learn through that history that Norman Osborn is duplicitous and is also using Peter to his own ends, knowing also that Peter is Spider-Man. He's using him to his own ends, which isn't how it's framed at first, because we are getting it from both of their perspectives, with the two principals being in the same room with each other. But when Norman is by himself and we have just him and his perspective, we see that side of him that's one day going to overwhelm the goodness and altruism, and he's going to become that enemy, that Peter's greatest enemy. And I think this is where it's going to hit even harder, because Norman will know a lot more about him when that happens.
Yeah. And they also established the friendship of Harry and Peter and showing the two differences of their worlds and how they come together. And then even with the one other good thing about it as well is, there's not really a big like romantic arc for Parker, and which is a good thing. And, he's always
one of the few times where he doesn't have, there's hints.
There's hints of it.
Very hints with two particular girls, but there's never a full developed romance or even he's not even put on track for that,
which is kind of nice. God. No, it's nice. Honestly, it's good world building, good narrative, and
that leaves room for Peter to be Peter and not and worry about Peter things as opposed to externalizing his motivations.
Yes,
because we've seen that before.
So go ahead, Cam.
No, I was going to say what Josh was saying. We've seen this narrative of Peter before. Between conflict. Let that man.
We only ever see that side, that aspect of Peter.
Yeah,
the super conflicted Peter. Yeah, no, you're right. But this is again, and I think I talked about it before. I was just like Cam said, I was not sure if I wanted to do this because there's been so many Spider-Man animated shows, and to be honest, only a few of them are actually good.
Yep.
And so I wasn't sure about this. But there was the fight between him and Scorpion, the first one. And Scorpion leaves that man traumatized. and I thought this is great because they follow up on him when he goes to fight him again and he's struggling, even though he's got a new suit, even though he's got all this stuff and he can beat him. But Scorpion is living in his head rent free. And I love that they went down that path because it gave Scorpion a little bit of even more presence. He isn't just this sort of thug that Spider-Man easily beats. Now he has a kind of psychological hold on him. And I thought that worked well.
Yeah, and they also did a good job with Tombstone's arc where, he's essentially a good kid that kind of joins a gang and kind of goes through a whole arc of things. But as he big gang fight, blah, 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 gets powers, him and Spider-Man team up to take down Scorpion. It actually works out. They go their separate ways, but then Tombstone develops even more to be Tombstone. And, and after he's a black kid, so and so he has like a nice little hero journey. Exactly. And then even the way he gets his powers, and then it was funny because at the end of the whole first arc, you see a little bit of the vitiligo on Tombstone's knuckles from his powers, which we all know later on he becomes an albino essentially. So it was like little small hints and nuances, and I think Jeff Trumbull did a really good job of like using all of these different characters. Like his Sinister Six is unfolding, but it's in a way that would make sense as opposed to this is Spider-Man. These are 9 villains in his rogue gallery that just happen to always want to fight him. Where this one's like they each are starting to have little pieces of understanding of why they would fight them or what would be the motivation around that. And I think that was something that was really cool because even Octavius being there as an arms dealer was hilarious because it was more just like to stick it to Norman Osborn, not about Peter Parker at all. And it will be later, but I like that dynamic of it. And
the two of them, Norman and in fact, Josh and I were laughing. I was sending Josh quotes from when Doc Ock tells when Goblin tells him, "Trust it'll work. Trust me." And he responds, he's like, "Of course you think it'll work. You the one that turned yourself into a monster, you lunatic." And so
is Tombstone's character black?
Yes, he's a black, and he lives in Harlem, I think.
Okay, so like I've seen what was the live action Tombstone played by what's the MC's name? Oh my god. Yeah, so I was like, is he been black or like not that it matters. I was
you know what? Honestly, in the last maybe 20 years, they've kind of shifted that. Crondon played him, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I would say in the last 20 years in the comic books, they've kind of shifted that, yes. And so they shifted in a way that gave the character more layers. Where before it was kind of like, it was a character from the 60s, beat him up, flat top kind of a thing, blah, blah, blah. And then later on in the last 20 years, I would say that character has been developed a little bit more, stuck him more in Harlem, more of a black character. He has a daughter. There's a whole thing in the Spider-Man's comic books called Gang War. And part of it is Tombstone's daughter takes over, and she takes over because she was dating, was it Robbie Robinson? Not Jameson, but Jameson's right hand man, the black guy. I always forget his name. His son. Yeah, Robbie. So his son, they have a whole thing together. But yeah, so there's things where it's like things make sense. There's a couple of things that didn't make sense. Like they changed the lizard, Dr. Connors, to a woman. Like I think it was like an Asian woman or something like that. And it kind of didn't make sense.
Yeah, she's
yeah, like because Lizard's whole motivation is to protect his family and that kind of stuff, and growing the arm and stuff. So I'm curious how they did that. They dropped a little Easter eggs, like Amadeus Cho is like in his intern class at Oscorp, which is kind of cool, and that's always like little things like that where I'm like, okay, good. But yeah, I would say
Josh, I don't think you watched far enough to get to see the Amadeus Cho introduction. I don't.
They introduced. They don't say his name, but I could tell the Asian kid in the lab coat.
Yeah.
In there.
Oh yeah, you would know that was him
immediately. I was like,
I forgot for a moment who I was talking to. You would definitely know who that was right off the bat.
I caught that out the gate.
Yeah. And I think for you mentioned earlier comparing Jeff Tramiel to Bo DeMaio, I think you can see both of them have a very similar sensibility of how they're approaching the Marvel properties that they're charged with.
Really?
They both approach from a world building perspective.
Yep.
They spend a lot of time developing orienting you of where these characters are and why. Even Charlie Cox's Daredevil shows up. And he's active in this world, and he actually has what's his sidekick name, which I didn't.
Oh yeah, that's actually from the comics too. It's a lot. It's a lot more convoluted, but I like that they did that touch.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of her. I want to get the name right. Hold on.
I always forget. This Daredevil.
She's got a specific Finesse. That's her name. Jean Foucault. Yeah. Finesse. She is and they position her really well. Especially because I was wondering how Daredevil was getting all that information, and then they bring it to showing that he's got this plant inside of Oscorp, and I thought that was cool. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, exactly.
But he's more established than the Prime. I don't know what to say about the Prime Daredevil MCU. I guess we'll see at the end of this.
We'll see if they can bookend it. But also, comic book nerd Finesse is actually Taskmaster's daughter. Actually, similar powers too. Pretty cool.
Okay, I thought the name Finesse was hilarious, but it'll stick at some point.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, overall, like I said, it's one of those things where it was a pleasant surprise. It was a good palate cleanser from all the things I've been watching because it was just like a nice, fun, wholesome type of thing. But done really, really well. And again, we shot him out again, but Jeff Tramiel, like that guy, he did like almost 26 episodes of Craig of the Creek. And
he's got a pretty good American animation. That's pretty much what he's been doing for these last few years is writing for animation. And he's got some pretty good stuff on his roster, but I think this might be where he really makes if there's not a lot of interference and if he's able to really pound out, I think this could be a nice solid 5-season animated, really successful animated Spider-Man tale. And what's great is that it allows Peter to come of age and become an adult in this story because he's starting in high school. So I enjoyed it. I wouldn't say that it's rush to stream exciting, but in terms of all the things that they've done recently, and especially looking at their blossoming, if you will, animation roster, I think this is a good step forward. Coming out of X-Men '97, this still gives me a lot of excited energy for what they might roll out in the future for different characters.
Definitely.
Except what if I'm not dealing with that. That's you guys hang up. I don't need to deal with that anthology. I don't care about this.
What if was cool, man? Did you ever finish season 1?
Nope. and didn't start season 2. I don't care about those stories, and you guys know that I'm a story person first.
Hey, and an endorsement from you, D'Angelo, is a big deal. So
Yes. Yeah. So,
but yeah, we'll leave it there. We'll leave the what if slander. There's some gems in there. It's not.
No, I'm harsh on what if, but you guys, it's a good show. Not my bag, but it's a good show.
I can see that. But yeah, Spider-Man is good enough to go watch. You don't got to put it at the top of your queue or anything, but it's definitely something to if you got some time to check it out. But yeah, we'll leave it there. This is Blerdlines talking about friendly Spider-Man, neighborhood Spider-Man, and we out.
Later.